Well, thank you. I'd like to welcome everybody, and I'm really glad that you came to hear my talk. A lot of it is a review from my dissertation, but it also speaks to how important retention really is, and it really is interconnected with everything on campus. So hopefully by the end of the presentation, we will have made those connections for you. But I'm going to start out first with an overview. So we're going to define what persistence, retention, and attrition are, because they are used interchangeably, but all mean something different. Then we're going to talk about the importance of retention, the history of retention. Then we'll move into retention models. I've got a couple that I'm going to show you that have kind of been the forerunners for where the current research is. And then finally, we'll talk about why retention is important to us, as in here on WU's campus. So first, let's talk about retention, persistence, and attrition. So retention is an institutional measure. Persistence is a student measure. So as you can see, with these words being used interchangeably, they don't really mean the same thing, because students persist, institutions retain. And then attrition is the diminution in numbers of students resulting from lower retention rates. So attrition is the number of students we lose from not retaining them. And so then why is retention important? As we know, it's a multifaceted, complex issue that there's no silver bullet in defining or solving this problem. It's been a problem throughout the history of higher education. It's just taken on a stronger role in the last, I would say, the 90s on. It's really taken a big role in how we look at in our institutions and the student services we provide. But what I'd like to talk to you about first is the cost to the student as well as the cost to the institutions. So say we got here and we didn't persist to the end of our degrees. What would maybe happen to us? One cost is the risk of developing an aversion to learning, and this happens because the student perceives they had a bad experience. So as you can tell, that has nothing to do with what we really do, because it's their perception of the experience here. So if they encounter a negative person, even on the phone, call the bookstore and they send you a million different ways, that could be a negative experience that students could end up leaving as a result of that experience. Granted, it's probably not that low level, but it is something to consider. Another one is the financial cost. So not only do they spend time going to get their education, but there's also the financial cost of if they don't graduate. And the cost of that could be they may have huge amounts of student loan debt that they can't pay back because they don't have access to higher paying jobs because they don't have that degree to let them in the door. So they're at higher risk for defaulting on their student loans, and then of course just at risk for not earning as much money as some other folks may earn. Continuing on, now let's talk about the institutional costs of student departure. What could be some maybe immediate direct costs that the institution could have as a result of students not persisting? Well, there's recruitment, financial aid, the loss of dollars for them having visitors come and the money they would spend on tutoring, other resources that they may pay for, which I know Western we provide a good bit, so they're probably not spending that money. But the bookstore, they're not purchasing there, they're not going downtown to eat at Eastie Beastie, stuff like that. So it ends up being much more than we really think about when you really break it down to 3 different categories. So the next category is the immediate indirect costs. Indirect costs are faculty staff salaries, because faculty staff salaries are based on enrollment numbers, not students served. So all that enrollment number is what we can then make the decisions. Can we hire? Can we do raises? That kind of thing. And then last, there's the long-term potential. And this goes into students who don't complete, they don't become donors to the institution. They may also not refer others to the institution. So say it kind of goes back to the power of 9 in the old customer service training of you have a bad experience with somewhere, so you tell 9 people, they tell 9 people, and before you know it, we could have an enrollment problem just simply from bad word of mouth. So it's very important that we do what we can to retain our students. And of course, an educated population is a productive population, and critical thinking skills are extremely important in this day of multimedia. We've got so many different things coming at us. And then college is an environment in which students can have that safe place to learn, so they can really hone those critical thinking skills without a fear of failure. All right, so institutional cost of attrition. But anyway, so this was an example that they just did. On the average tuition for an in-state public college is $7,600. All right, so let's say 800 out of 4,000 using an 80% tuition rate drop out of school. Then the gross amount of tuition loss is $6,800,000. $80,000, and I minus the $400,000 because that's the estimated cost that this example used in the amount the institutions spend on financial aid. So we don't just get money from federal dollars. There's also institutions put their own money into financial aid to be able to have grants and scholarships and other ways to help close the gap of what their financial need is. So that results in a net loss of $5,680,000. That's a lot of money, right? Unless we can replace all of these students, which is becoming increasingly unlikely. We've got flat graduation rates in the state of Oregon, and we've got a new institution competing with us that has a goal of 5,000 really soon in Bend. And who wouldn't want to go do their college experience in Bend? So now we're going to talk about the history of retention and what happened as we got to where we are today. So in the origins from 1600 to the mid-1800. Okay, so as we know, in the beginning, higher education was for the elite few. Degree completion was rare. Students went to college, got whatever skill they needed, and then went out to their job. The paper didn't matter. Institutions were also fairly new, so they were focused on their own survival and not necessarily retaining students and that type of stuff. Then we had the Mauro land grant of 1862, which is really what was one of the first things that opened higher education to the masses. So we're taking a big jump from the 1800s to the 1930s is the next big time that stuff happened. So the first studies on retention began. John McNeely in 1938 was the first one to start looking at factors that influence whether students persist or don't. So he looked at demographic characteristics, social engagement, reasons for departure, and again, he was our groundbreaking study to the precursor to what went on in the 60s. Then the GI Bill happened, and it had an impact on higher ed in that we had all these World War II veterans coming back and getting education. So again, we see access explode, we see higher education institutions being built, a lot of growth in this area. And then we had the Higher Education Act of 1965, which allowed for even more access to higher education. And then it created support services to ensure academic success as well. And institutions at this time started developing research and programs dedicated to the understanding and supporting of student retention. We're starting to see that, oh, this is a big deal, we need to think about this. All right, so now come the 70s. The study of college student retention is born. William Spady did the first study in 1970, and he looked at a sociological model of student dropout. It was based upon Emile Durkheim's suicide theory. Then we had Vincent Tinto in 1975. Tinto also used Emile Durkheim's suicide theory to build his, but he also added the student integration piece. So a model helps us to understand and explain the student departure process and also what we can do to mitigate students leaving college without completing their degree. All right, so Spady, 1970, based on Emile Durkheim's suicide theory, first widely accepted retention model. Had 5 variables indirectly related to student departure decisions, and that was academic potential, normative congruence, grade performance, intellectual development, and social. All right. Spady found that the formal academic performance was the dominant factor for student attrition. All right, so here is Spady's model. So as you can see, it takes family background into consideration. It also has your academic potential and your normative congruence. And then from there, we lead into grade performance, intellectual development, friendship, social integration, and then based on all this stuff going on, they either decide to drop out or they decide to commit to the institution. So as you can tell, there's a lot of factors going on here. So now Tinto, it's partially based on Durkheim's suicide model. Student attrition is linked to both formal and informal academic experiences and social integration. And this is really what sets Tinto apart, is that he really figured out that that academic experience plus social integration were critical to student success. His model has been revised and expanded. The last revision was in 2014. And so in the expansions of his model, he has included the alignment of student experience with student expectations, and then supporting student transition as they move through their college experience is another important factor of Tinto. And then here's Tinto's model. And it basically, again, takes your pre-collegiate factors. It really is taking a holistic look at the student and pretty much every aspect that could influence them. And then based on all the decisions and where they're going, they either commit to their goal and stay at the institution, or they may drop out. All right, so now we move to the 1980s. So we've got declines in enrollment Enrollment Management is born. And Enrollment Management takes a university-wide approach. So that's where you start to see the different areas collaborating. And that's where Student Affairs gets to do more deeper work and really cross-collaboration with other Student Affairs folks on campus. And then facilitation across academic and Student Affairs as well. Our retention literature group, and then it became a focal point of institutional strategic plans. The theories of the 80s also began stressing the importance of prior academic experience, distance from home, socioeconomic status, student satisfaction, and influence of peers on student involvement, and then how students develop during their college experience. All right, and now fast forward to the 90s. So literature now began focusing on retaining students of color, underrepresented populations, individuals from disadvantaged backgrounds, and the research focused on how institutions can embrace diversity, promote multiculturalism on campus. Tinto 1993 is where he finally figured out that different students with unique experience require specific interventions and policies. So this is where you start to see a lot more push at meeting the individual needs of the student based on background characteristics, as well as how they're adjusting to college. The second half of the decade, student transition periods began being studied. So the fact that students do transition from high school to college. And then they also transition, as they're here. So a freshman needs much different support than a senior does. The first year experience became popular, providing quality support services just to all students. So it wasn't just like, oh, we have this thing, but really starting to educate students that here, we offer these services, we're here to help you. We want to have you succeed. Also campus-wide collaboration. So again, breaking down the silos, really starting to work with one another to promote the best student experience possible for our students. And then Anderson, 1997. So advising is imperative. It keeps students motivated. Wyckoff, 1998. Interaction students have with all institutional members influences their decision to stay. So again, earlier I talked about the person picking up the phone in the bookstore sending you a million different directions. That's not a good experience. We don't want to have that happen. So we want to make sure that we have the right people in the right places, but also that the people answering the phones know where to send that person. So you're not sending them 6 different places and they have to tell their story 6 different times and they've wasted 30 minutes. And then Tinto, 99, advising should be an integral part of the first year and of development because your relationship with your academic advisor is so key. I don't know how to stress that, but it really is a key relationship because most of the time your academic advisor is your first point of contact on campus. You may have the admissions folks, but when it really comes into, okay, how am I going to adjust to college? What's here for me? That's really where your advising folks come in and can talk to them about the different supports available. So now 2000 to the present. Holistic approaches to undergraduate retention carried over. Programs and initiatives stress formal and informal student experiences inside and outside of the classroom. So not only what happens inside the classroom is super important, but also what happens outside of the classroom is also very important to a student's decision to stay or depart. Hadley, 2004, talked about the sense of connection, ability to navigate the campus culture, meet expectations, and also graduate. Tinto, 2004, talks about easily accessible academic, personal, and social supports are a must, because high expectations plus actively involving students in their learning equals an environment where students are likely to succeed. And at the end of the day, that's our goal. We want our students to stay, we want to retain them, we want them to succeed, we want them to become friends of the university. Factors influencing retention: academic preparation, obviously, academic engagement, social engagement, financing college, and demographic characteristics. Quality of prior instruction. So for example, we don't necessarily control the K-12 that they came out of. Our students are coming from all over. They're coming from Hawaii, they're coming from across the country. We've got students from everywhere. So that's a lot of different K-12 systems that we then get the product of. And then preparedness for college work. Completion of a strong high school curriculum is a predictor of undergraduate success. And then high school achievement indicators are GPA, high school rank, and those positively correlate with undergraduate retention. How do we get students to engage in their academics? All right, so through their connection with academic life. If they have a strong relationship with faculty, they're gonna come in and ask you for help. They're gonna feel more comfortable approaching you. Many freshmen are scared to death of us. Like, they think we're these mean, scary people, and the reality is we care about them. We want you to be helpful. We want you to be successful. Come talk to me. I will help you with whatever I can help you with. Or if I don't know math very well, I know I can send you to Sylvia, and she will talk to you about math, and she'll help you. And that's kind of great stuff. So just, you know, as academic advisors or other student affairs professionals on campus, we can still have a positive impact by talking to students, normalizing faculty, and, you know, just helping them see them as they are regular people just like us. And then, of course, positive faculty-student interactions, taking advantage of resources that promote academic success. So again, reframing the services we offer into that this is a good thing for you. The Writing Center is great. They will help you learn to write better. It's not that you're a terrible writer, you don't know how to write, you need all this skill building. It's just always good to have another set of eyes looking at your work, proofreading. Sometimes I don't always have my grammar in the right place, so it's nice to have somebody else reading something that way I can learn from, and next time hopefully I'll remember. Another thing is learning communities, so linking courses with the student experience. And then, of course, any program that encourages faculty-student interactions is going to be great because the students are here to learn from the faculty. You know, and then Western, we promote that we are student-centered. There is that small faculty-to-student ratio, so we really have the ability to really do a good job with this and help foster those relationships between our faculty and our students. So failing to make satisfactory academic progress is one of the strongest predictors to failure to graduate, and I think that's important to keep in mind, because especially if someone is having to do some developmental work, you know, if they're not having a positive experience with that, or they're being made to feel shameful of being in this class, that's going to impact probably how they do in that class, and then again, they may not get that strong foundation they really know, and then they may end up failing the next level of class and repeating. And there's a lot of literature on the impact that failing classes actually has on students and their self-esteem, and then that factors into their decision to stay or go. All right, so social engagement. Humans are social beings. We want to be accepted, we want to be in the in-crowd, and we want to successfully integrate into the social life of our campus, because that will then help us be successful in our academic lives. The important factors to student integration are making friends, finding mentors, connections with faculty, and the act of social integration is a cumulative process. So I think that's also something important to keep in mind, is that they're learning, and every semester they're here, and each week they're here longer, they learn more and more, and their whole college experience ends up being an accumulation of everything they've learned. And then participations in student orgs and engaging in campus traditions positively influences institutional commitment and retention. All right, so then financing college. How do we pay for this monster? So there are a few financial risk factors of students not completing college, and that is folks that have high need when they come in, first generation, less rigorous academic preparation, and then students with high financial need are more successful when they are given scholarships and grants, but scholarships and grants are not a guarantee that they will persist. So that's kind of important to keep in mind too. So demographic characteristics. So parents' level of education, the first generation struggle a lot because they've a lot of times got their familial expectations, and then they're trying to go to college, and they've got parents that don't understand what's going on with school. So they don't understand, well, why can't you come home every night? Why do you have to live on campus? What's that about? Like, no, you just go and come back. But we know that they need this holistic approach to really be successful in college. Gender, as we know, females are more likely to persist than males. Ethnicity, socioeconomic status, distance from hometown. First generation students attending four-year institutions are twice as likely to depart from the institution before the start of their second year. And if you don't have parents that have been through this, you don't have that person at home being like, you can do this, we know you. And I'm not saying first generation parents are not supportive. I'm certain that they are, but they're not going to be supportive in the same way that somebody who's been through the process and understands the process would be. So then why is retention important to us? And this is specific to WU. So I saw this stat and I totally stole it from Sue Monahan's presentation. Well, that's my last slide. So April 11th is Sylvia Valdez Fernandez, and she'll be talking about math is the new social justice. And then we have Rob Troyer in May, and he will be talking about international students.